Okay, so how much do brokers make on the loads you haul? How much do you deserve to make? And can they be trusted to honestly report the numbers? We're going to talk about all of that coming up next. Okay, so you've heard me talk about Operfi on the show from time to time, and we've even had the pleasure of having Tom and Danny from Operfi on the show. But did you also know that Operfi offers a fuel card, same-day instant payments with their tank card? You get factoring rebates when you submit an invoice. Each time you spend on the tank card on things like fuel, corporate expenses, and even ATMs, you earn a bigger rebate. There's also no bank holiday restrictions. Operfi also offers a training academy, veteran discounts, free 24/7 credit checks, a huge vendor network, and more. They also don't have any minimums or long-term contracts. Once you're onboarded, you'll be educated on Operfi's processes and how they work to grow your operation. Click the link in the description below. You'll thank me later. Okay, so this might be the most heated conversation in trucking right now, right? With groups like the National Owner Operators Association outright accusing big brokers, mega carriers, and load boards, and other freight data analytic providers of either manipulating rates data or allowing deception on the platforms. So, for instance, the NOOA engages in frequent sparring matches with DAT Chief Analytics Ken Adamo on Twitter, now called X, over just how much brokers are really making off of their hauls. Okay. Adamo, for his part, made himself available to questions and encouraged skepticism and constructive feedback on the company's data products. Despite this and his rigor in sharing sources and methodology, many remain unconvinced. A recent 9-page study from Adamo looked at the data submitted by DAT's customers and reported back analysis. Can't read my own writing here. Of the margins posted by brokers. As you know, so flatbed brokers came out with the highest average margin of just over 15%. Reefer at almost 14%, and dry van bringing up the rear at about 13%. Okay, the accurate numbers on that was brokers are averaging 15.14% on open deck loads. Brokers moving refrigerated freight are averaging 13.82%, and dry van loads, they're making roughly 13.01%. Okay. DAT basically gets its numbers from customers who became contributors or undergo an onboarding process where they learn to submit standardized data reporting, which is verified by both DAT and the customer to be correct. According to Adamo's study, the contributors were brokers and broker carrier customers, and most submitted data directly out of their TMS systems. Okay. The paper contains a few ideas for avoiding brokers reaping a high margin from your haul. Interestingly enough, for the long distance OTR crowd, the study found that margin decreases as the length of haul increases, which Adamo attributed to fixed costs of truckers and brokers on a per load basis, amortizing over longer distances. Okay. The average margin under 250 miles sat at about 15.2%. The 1,000+ mile haul segment sees just 11.7% average margin for brokers. Okay. According to DAT's data, the map, there's a map that they have showing where load origin states where brokers make the highest margin. So that's another area an owner operator can check out. And it looks like primarily it would be out of like Maine being the highest. I believe that might be New Jersey, Florida, some in Texas. The lowest margins were made out of Montana, Wisconsin, Idaho, Oregon, places like that. But it's, which there's a lot more lower margins across the U.S. map than there are higher margin areas. I should have probably screenshot that so that I could show that, but I did not think about it at the moment. But to get the value out of the report, you have to trust the underlying data. An OOA spokesman contended these numbers weren't audited by a party outside of DAT itself, and DAT puts disclaimers on their data products warning users to use the data at their own risk. And while this is all true, DAT's numbers do line up with other publicly available figures that do undergo independent scrutiny. Okay, so the numbers that DAT put out are pretty accurate. Okay, publicly traded brokerages who are subject to independent audits and face stiff federal fines and penalties for misconduct offer another potential example of real world margins. And just as a quick side note here, before I get into the rest of this, I see some of the other videos out on YouTube about broker transparency, and brokers are taking more than half on every load. They get all, and of course the person putting out the video, they're just stoking that fire, right? They're just stoking it, and it's mind-boggling to me that they're even allowed to do that, because they're not looking at any data, right? Just somebody said this on the internet, so it must be true, right? It's almost laughable, and I think that a lot of this comes from people that are probably fairly new to the industry, that don't know any better, who haven't developed relationships with their broker, right? Because once you do that, oftentimes the broker's pretty transparent about what he's making, right? Most of my carriers know what I'm making, and if they come back and say, hey, Tim, it's costing me a little bit more to run on this lane than what we've been running it at, is there any wiggle room on this, and we'll have a conversation, right? And because one thing I do believe in strengthening relationships between myself and my carriers, or in anything, is good communication, right? So, and there was a short that I saw, and I mentioned this in a previous video about how, this broker was talking about, being successful as a freight broker. Half of your success comes from your shipper, the other half comes from your carrier. What they were talking about was, the building of relationships, right? That helps you be successful. But automatically, there was people on there that they listened to respond. They didn't listen to learn or understand what they were saying, right? And so they automatically said, oh, the broker's making 50%. Oh, you'll never get my truck, things like this. Or this is another one that I've seen, so as an agent, typically agents make anywhere from 50 to 70% of the gross profit on a load. Well, a lot of carriers hear that. They go, you're making 60 or 50 to 70% on the load? Oh, I'm never working for you. Of the gross profit, right? So if let's say that agent moves a load, they get a load from their customer for $1,000. We're going to break this down into very easy numbers, right? And I've probably said this before in a past video, but they get a load from a customer that, let's say, is $1,000. They get a carrier willing to do it for $900. That means they make a 10% profit margin on that load. Yeah. Okay. of that $100, that agent makes 50 to 70%, which means he's getting paid $50 to $70 of that $100 gross profit, right? Simple enough. But too many times, like I said, we listen to respond. We don't listen to understand or to learn or to understand. This is a thing, and I'm not picking on anybody. I'm really not. But it seems to me that a lot of carriers want brokers to understand, everything that's related with their job, right? And what they go through and what their expenses are and all these kinds of things. But carriers don't want to learn what it takes and what brokers' expenses are and all of these types of things, right? The time that's put into acquiring those loads, building that relationship with that customer so that they can offer you that consistent freight, right? It's been long said that if you're basically living on the spot market, you're probably going nowhere fast, right? Or at least in similar words. Okay, my little side note rant is over. C.H. Robinson, in its latest quarterly release, said it made $386 million in adjusted gross profits, right? That's gross revenue, less labor and overhead costs, on about $3.1 billion in revenue. This isn't an exact broker margin calculation, but it comes to about 12.45% margin, profit margin for the company overall. Those are released numbers, right? So, like I said, I've said it before, there might be instances where a broker does make more, but on average, right, it's not the norm that they're making these huge margins, right? And if they are, and and you take the load and you get upset about it after the fact, I want to know the make and model of the gun that was held to your head that made you take that load, right? So the profit number is down 31% year over year. In the comparison quarter in 2022 Q3, C.H. Robinson noted it made $563 million on $4 billion, which comes to about 14%, right? JB Hunt's 360 brokerage has fared similarly over the course of the rates downturn, according to the company's latest quarterly earnings. A few recent broker bankruptcies, like Convoy's $3.8 billion collapse, and back in June, the implosion of Mississippi-based Trans Plus freight system made headlines too. Kevin Hill of Brush Pass Research recently posted on LinkedIn that according to the latest numbers, in December, broker authorities have seen negative year-over-year growth of about 6%. Okay, people, these are rock hard numbers, right? It's data. So before you just start listening to somebody commenting on a video, or it tells you that brokers are making 60%, because my aunt's sister's cousin's uncle, works at a brokerage and they know. Come on, I can tell you that penguins are alive and well and flying all over Florida, right? Because I said it on the internet, I said it in a video, it must be true. Okay. Of course, carriers are going out of business too, right? That's on the other side of that coin. Assuming a few raw deals from a hard negotiating broker might sink a shaky trucking business, right? It's important to watch every percentage point. Now, I should have elaborated on this as I was writing this, but one thing I'm going to say is that brokers go through a lot of vetting with their carriers, right? But it seems that carriers don't vet brokers near as much as brokers vet carriers, right? And I'll say this because, and I may have talked about it in previous videos. I'm pretty sure that I have, with a broker taking a load because let's say current market rate that was shown on load board was $2,700, right? You see this load posted for 4,000, and you go, holy, I need to get down on that, right? You call, yeah. We'll get that rate confirmation over to you. What's the best email? There were times when I would get these phone calls about, Tim, what do I do now, right? From some of these carriers, they didn't even fill out a broker carrier setup, right? That's red flag number one. Red flag number two was they got a confirmation that looked like it was put together by a 3-year-old that was just learning Photoshop. Okay. It was put together on Microsoft Word or something, like just real sketchy, nothing lined up. It was like they took snippets of a previous confirmation and just sort of pasted it together, or something. Now, it was a legit load, but it was obviously a double brokered load in this instance, right? And there's so many other similar stories. Okay. Part of this came about as a result of the originating broker of the load not doing their due diligence and vetting their carrier, right? It does happen. I for whatever reason, and I believe the broker, the individual at that particular brokerage was actually like the vice president or something. Like he stepped in to book some loads, and he should have known better, right? But this carrier accepted the load. It had been like 35 days. This broker that they had gotten the load from, no response to emails, text messages, phone calls, smoke signals, telegram, carrier pigeon, nothing, right? Could not reach them. Saw one of my videos, emailed me. I said, hey, do you have time for a quick phone call? We went over this. Inevitably, we tried to find out who this broker was. I couldn't find any information on them because they didn't exist, right? Ended up calling the shipper. We spent like 3 days on this, right? Finally got a hold, and they were a big company, and found out who the originating broker was. Inevitably, they ended up getting this carrier set up under them, and having a discussion with them that, hey, this carrier that you initially, carrier A that was on this load that double brokered the load, didn't even have a dry van, right? They were running like an F-250 or something in a little PJ trailer. So how could you have possibly issued them the load, right? So vetting goes a long way, right? This goes with credit checking your carriers, right? So having a factoring company like Operfi protects your business. Well, I'll just get quick pay from a broker. How many times have I more times than I've got fingers and toes, I'll tell you that. More times that I've gotten phone calls say, hey, Tim, I set up quick pay for that broker, and I'm still, 30 days in and no payment. If you're living off quick pay, and sometimes those percentages on quick pay are far more than what the percentage that the factoring company would charge you, right? Think about factoring as sort of like an insurance, right? Okay, moving on. So Adamo's paper passes the sniff test in particular ways. For instance, showing a big uptick in loads booked for just above a 0% margin. This suggests brokers, as with truckers, really don't like to lose money on loads. Some percentage of the time, a broker tells you a price, is their bottom dollar. They might just be telling you the truth, right? And there's times that I've lost money on loads, right? Customer calls me, said, hey, we got this last minute load. It's got to go out. Here's what we got to pay. They weren't willing to negotiate on the rate at all. Say they were telling me 1,700. Carrier said, I'll do it, but I need 2,000. You know what I mean? I ended up losing $300 on that load. That came out of my pocket, right? So It does happen. I've broke even on loads, and I don't like to do it. You don't like to do it, right? We all have families to support and bills to pay, right? So we don't ever like to lose money, but to keep my relationship with my carriers and my customers, it does happen, from time to time. Owner operators among NOOA's membership aren't exactly buying all of this, though, right? Officially, the NOOA, I don't know why I can't say that, launched a boycott of big brokers like TQL and JB Hunt over transparency issues. If you remember a while back, the 44% margin that this owner operator noted she discovered on a TQL load after the FMCSA compelled the broker to provide that documentation. Many owner operators, including among NOOA's members, suspect that high margins like this may be closer to the norm than any major industry figure wants to admit, right? I guarantee you it is not the norm, right? That's why we're bringing forth hard data, right, with these numbers as proof. Adamo's white paper sought to dispel that with a sample of 500,000 randomly selected shipments from 521 unique contributors among brokerages, totaling $930 million in shipper revenue, right, and $803 million in freight spend. According to the white paper, this sample included short hauls and long hauls, right? So you got kind of some diversity there, in the types of hauls, and consisted of 70% dry van loads, 16% flatbed or open deck, and 14% of that was reefer. Again, the entire study showed about a 15% margin for brokers, which is in line with what the Transportation Intermediary Association, or the TIA, the most prominent group representing brokers, has said in its most recent quarterly industry reports. Okay. With the release of Adamo's analysis, the NOOA spokesperson said that the report did a good job addressing the need for a representative sample, but the report's limitation lies in the fact that the sample represents only approximately 20% of DAT's total broker contribution volume for 2023, which does not fully capture the variability of the freight market or broker's margin. Okay. So Adamo disagreed to an extent. While it's true that this data set was sampled from a filtered subset of our contribution data, and he understood that there is concern over the sample size, and he's not sure the exact nature of the concern unless NOOA has a reason to believe that the 20% was sampled in a way that wasn't representative, right? Oversampling in a particular geography, for instance, time of year, or other factor, then the size of the base data set is well within the bounds of what would be considered for an analysis of this type. Okay? That is, from a bare bones data perspective, the sample size ought to be big enough to reflect the general nature of the whole. Consider that presidential election polls, important and well-funded as they are, typically get a sample size of 1,000 or so likely voters. Okay. Meanwhile, they're routinely used to make conclusions about 170 million or so likely voters in the country. 500,000 loads is certainly a bigger chunk of the broker's whole freight whole. Other disciplines would be more than happy with that. In other words, as a representative sample. Adamo went on to add that NOOA's concern only has merit if NOOA believes that the sample data is missing or is skewed towards by a subset of the total broker load population. If the NOOA or anyone can demonstrate how these numbers are skewed, Adamo said he's all ears, basically, right, on how he can improve the study, which he went on to quote, "I would like to understand where they believe this bias exists, and I would be more than willing to test it for the underlying database." Okay. Some among the NOA members dismissed DAT's numbers entirely, citing aforementioned data disclaimers and or lack of third-party audits. Again, if you remember at the beginning of this, I mentioned that, you know, it's in line with other independent audits, right? DAT's was. NOA successfully kicked up lots of dust and questioned around the DAT margins analysis, yet the organization has not proven the numbers false or that they're without some merit. Any medicine, plane ticket, new truck from Peterbilt comes with some kind of a disclaimer. Reports of brokers making massive margins on loads don't get audited either, in large part due to confidentiality requirements in contract language. Okay, so how much are brokers making off the owner operators, right? Brokers make as much money from doing business with you as you let them. Okay, it all comes down to negotiation. I will tell you from personal experience, which I think that this probably happens more often if you're using an independent dispatcher. And I kind of get, as a broker, I get dismissive over the phone with some of these, because they will. This is basically how the call goes down. Is they will call and they'll say, "I'm calling about this load you have picking up in Dallas going to Portland," right? Just as an example. What are you paying on that load? Okay, well, you don't know any of the load requirements, right? It may or may not fit you. You know, there might be accessorials involved that you can't, that you don't have the proper tools for, right? Maybe it requires 8-foot tarp. You've got 4-foot tarp. You don't have any 8. So why are we still discussing this, right? I'm not trying to be short. I'm not trying to be rude. But at the same time, if all you're doing is calling to find out how much the load pays without understanding what the load requires, I probably don't want to talk to you, right? You're probably not going to be a good fit for me or my customer. I want a carrier that I can build a relationship with, right? Just because I work with you one time doesn't mean that I don't want to work with you again if you do a good job, right? You expect me to do a good job. I expect you to do a good job. I expect the shipper to provide me with accurate load details, right? So that I can pass them on accurately to you. If there's a problem, you need to call me at 3:00 in the morning. You have my cell number. I answer the phone, right? I may or may not be able to do anything about it at that time of night, but I'll certainly be there. You won't be left hanging. You won't be calling an outside call center or something, right? And if it is something that I can do, or like if I have to reschedule an appointment, whatever, right? But yeah, or they'll ask about a load. You go over the load details, and okay, well, what are you paying on that load? I tell them, and they say, okay, thank you, and then they hang up. No negotiation, no anything. If I'm offering, let's just say, for example, 1,500 on the load, you needed 16 or 17, right? I might be able to go back to the customer and say, hey, can we get an extra $100 or something on this load, right? Doesn't hurt, but if you don't negotiate, right? And I've had times where they say, what are you paying on this load? You tell them, okay, send it over. They didn't ask for more. They didn't anything. Right? So if my intent was to make, let's say, and again, hypothetically, if I was looking to make an 18% profit margin on this, but you asked a little bit more and I only made a 15% profit margin or a 13% profit margin, I'd probably still be happy with that. And you got a little bit of extra money in your pocket as well, right? But if you don't negotiate with me or whatever broker that you're dealing with, you're not going to get more, right? So anywho, let's see. Where did I leave off at? Regardless of how much a broker makes, owner operators find themselves in a tough market where better defenses against loss remain knowing your business, cutting costs where you can, owning your backyard by making direct contact with shippers, right? Which I understand that can be difficult, especially if you're an owner operator or you don't have a minimum fleet size. There's a lot of shippers out there that they won't even let us work with carriers for their on their loads if they have a fleet size of, say, less than 5 or 10 or whatever, right? Because of all the rampant fraud that's going on in the industry, right? I love working with owner operators. I honestly, I really truly do. This is another quick side note because typically I get to talk to them a little bit more, right? I get to build that communication with them, develop a relationship versus, say somebody that's got 1,000 trucks or something, right? I very rarely, if ever, even talk to the driver. Everything kind of goes through their dispatcher and things. They're busy. But when I get to understand that owner operator, what lanes that they run, what they typically need to make per mile, all these kinds of things, that better helps me understand where they're at, and if I have some other available freight that might fit them, right? And they do a good job, which most of my owner operators do, right? And I would really rather work with them, pay them more, because it works out, right? Because I'm able to strengthen that relationship with my customer as well, because I've got a solid carrier for their load, right? They let me know, they check in with me. I don't really have to worry about tracking them. I don't have to anything, right? They do their job, right? So going on, it's not hard to find brokers bragging about making 40, 50, or somehow even 100% margin on loads. How you make 100% margin on a load, I don't know. If somebody wants to explain that to me, maybe they penalized you or something after, when the load delivered for something. I don't know. But anywho, recently a court found TQL guilty of not paying overtime to 4,500 employees who were strongly encouraged to work 60 hours a week, revealing how brokers face pressure to work long hours and drive hard bargains, right? Maybe that's why a lot of owner operators distrust brokers, because they're also hardworking and pursuing the best possible profits only on the carrier side. James Anderson, an NOA member owner operator, said he routinely books loads for $1 to $1.50 higher than DAT's data products average the lanes. Something he attributes to being a hard negotiator, right? So like I mentioned earlier about negotiating, right? It just depends. So you have to do that, and having an iron grip on his own numbers, right? You have to understand your break-even costs, right? And this is another thing. Operfi has a break-even calculator. You'd be surprised the number of carriers out there that don't even know their break-even costs, right? Which is kind of sad, because they should. They really, really should. And once you better understand your break-even costs, that allows you to be more profitable, right? But he also said that he ran mostly cash operation, and like the vast majority of owner operators, didn't report his rates to DAT until he was recently invited to by Adamo. My specific question is, how am I represented in data that determines the rate analytics, said Anderson, who runs almost entirely on the spot market. Under the current structure of DAT's rate calculations, customers can only be onboarded into the reporting protocol by the company's data operations department, explained Adamo, who welcomed more small fleet participation on the platform. But the NOA spokesperson suggested that might just be a bid for more customers, and that fraudulent activity on DAT's platform, while many small carriers don't contribute directly, casts doubt on the averages, right? in the entire argument over margins and rates and reporting, a conspicuous lack of trust between the NOOA affiliate owner operators and DAT made reconciling the two accounts of the market almost impossible, right? They're just button heads. Anderson and others at NOOA promised a long-in market-making project with more representative rates data that would debunk DAT's narrative about rates and margins. It remains a work in progress for now, but NOOA hopes to present it to senators and then public when it's ready. Adamo said that within DAT's data, the extreme majority of freight moved by brokers comes from the top 1,000 brokers. Okay. Now, something to keep in mind here is that loads reported by brokers do represent loads hauled by small carriers and owner operators who haven't been onboarded in DAT's data reporting system. Okay. Even though there are 27,000 active brokerages, the top 1,000 control 80% of the domestic transportation management market. Okay. So there may be some truth to the smallest carriers and brokers missing out on representation in DAT's data products. But if they don't report the loads to anyone, how can DAT possibly include them? Right? So gotta report it. As these larger questions swarm around trucking, we're going to continue to kind of keep an eye on this. And I would really like to get everybody's feedback on this. Do you agree with the broker transparency? I know a lot of brokers. I mean, it doesn't really help you, right? They have to provide it within 48 hours of you delivering the load, right? If I'm understanding this correctly. So it won't help you on that load that you booked, right? And all it's going to inevitably end up doing is destroying your relationship with that broker, right? And that broker is not going to want to work with you anymore. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting topic. I think that both sides have some validity to their argument, but I guess you could use the example of, you don't go into the store and ask them what their cost was, right? Say you found something for $5, it cost them $2 to buy it. You know what I mean? They're selling it for $3 more than what they paid for it. No, I'll give you $3, not $5. It doesn't work that way. Well, this is a free market, right? Also, another point that's been brought up that I had thought about myself as well is that, when rates are high and, brokers are making, or I'm sorry, when carriers are making huge profits, right? And at times brokers are making smaller margins or sometimes no margin at all. They don't care, right? So should there be transparency? What are your operating, what's your break-even costs? Should there be a limit on how much you can make as a carrier? I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. Drop a comment in the description below. Again, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Check out my suggested tools and services in the description there. Ones that I use regularly. eCarrierCheck. Don't forget to check out their channel as well. A lot of great information. Nate and Jared over there, a couple of really great guys. They'll throw you some nuggets of information. You're gonna be like, wow, I'm glad that I got turned on to these guys, right? Because a lot of their content is just pure gold. So that being said, I'll go ahead and wrap this up. I've been rolling here for almost 40 minutes now, right? So I'll let everybody get back to their day. And as always, be kind to one another. Bye now.